Well, hello, folks. My name is Art Palmer.
And I'm Peggy Palmer, and we're married. And
Excellent.
Well, Art, have you ever been in a cave before?
Yes, many times.
You said you was interested in caves before you'd ever actually been in one.
Oh, yes. Reading things like Tom Sawyer, I wanted to be in that cave where he got lost, long before I ever went to a real cave. And just the idea of exploring in a place where you can't see around the next corner, you have no idea what's coming up, that would appeal to me greatly.
And so you've been doing that for much of your life, going around the next corner to see what was there.
That's right, yes. It's been a fairly long life. I'm 80 now, which is more than I was when I was a child. But I've kept that interest. Yeah, I had a brother who was younger than I. In fact, he was, and still is, 7 years younger, which is quite a span. But we hit it off very nicely. We always have liked each other and done things together. And he was my main companion in the first years of caving, which really didn't amount to much because most of the caves were within 20 minutes drive of our home. So,
how about your Baker's Quarry? Say?
Yeah, Baker's Quarry Cave is a famous cave in that area. You can get far enough in that you can't see the entrance. So it's really pretty exciting. You get into total darkness. That really appealed to both of us. And we made a map of it and so forth. It was one of our first tasks, was to make a map of this cave. And the map is about as large as the cave itself.
Was this the first cave you ever visited?
Actually, the first cave was not that one, but it was Howe Caverns in New York State, just over the hill. And Howe Caverns is a tourist cave, and we went in, and I was interested, but I wasn't thrilled because I couldn't leave everybody and explore where I wanted to. And so on the way back, this was with a family. I was only about 14 at the time. I noticed on the map a place called Knox Cave, and it used to be a tourist cave. And we stopped by at Knox Cave, and here's this old guy whose remains, interestingly enough, lie up the hill just behind us here a few miles. He was from this area, but he was in charge of a cave on his property in Albany County. Well, we stopped by there, and he said, "Sure, if you want to go into the cave, go ahead." We normally charge money for people to go in, but there won't be a guide with you, so why don't you just go in and enjoy yourselves for a few minutes and see if you like it. And so, of course, we scampered in there, and my father came along too. My father's interest lasted about, maybe 10 minutes, and so he came out. And as soon as the guy sees my father emerge, he figures, okay, they're coming out of the cave, so he turned the lights out. And here we are in the dark. But fortunately, we had our flashlights with us. And we were scampering around all over the place, going into side passages and climbing up pits and things like that. It worked out quite nicely. We were excited because that was our own exploration. It wasn't somebody showing us around. And there was a lot of stuff in there that we couldn't see around the corner and dark places and so forth. So that's a real cave, Knox Cave. Well, we went back home and moved back to Massachusetts, where we're from, and we didn't go caving again until a few years later because we realized that we were not in a cave area. We hadn't heard of any caves at all. But my parents said, there's a fellow who works for the newspaper, Clay Perry. Why don't you go up and talk to him? The idea of going up and interviewing somebody who I didn't know was pretty scary. But I went up there. Maybe my brother was with me, but I don't think so. But anyway, I went up there and I talked to him. He was quite enthusiastic, and he said, "Gee, you know, I'd like to introduce you to other people in the area who do that sort of thing." And so away we went. He introduced me to several people who were real cavers, and there was a grotto, an NSS grotto in that area called the Berkshire Hills Grotto. And Clay Perry was the guy who invented the name spelunking. Actually, he didn't invent it himself, but he popularized it because one of the people in the grotto, Roger Johnson, came up with the idea of spelunker because he was doing a crossword puzzle. He says, what's the name for a person who goes into caves? And he found the word spelunker. He says, aha. He realized that spelunka was the name for a cave, and so spelunker would be going into a cave. He said, well, that must mean that I'm a spelunker, and I explore caves. And he was one of the founders of the grotto. That was back in the 1930s, I believe. And so I started out in a really good area. Not many caves, but they were fairly small, but the support was quite large. And so anyway, it was a pretty provocative time, and I really latched onto it, and so did my brother. And so the fellow Clay Perry told us where to go, so to speak, what caves to visit. And there were little ones, because that's all there was in the area. One of them was quite nice because it was all in marble with bands of light and dark and all that. There's a photo of it in our bathroom by Kevin Downey, one of the best cave photographers in the NSS. And so anyway.
Tell about meeting scientists in there.
Yeah. So this evolved, and pretty soon we got together with other grottos, and we met a lot of other people too who were just interested in caves. The NSS was really just getting started about those years, and it was growing fast, and so it wasn't long before people from other grottos started showing up in Massachusetts, and I met them all. And then there were such things as regional meetings where we could all get together and do caving in our own particular ways, and it worked out like that. It just sort of grew. Most important thing, I think, was getting out of hometown and moving to other areas to see what's going on there. Going to college, we had outing club trips, and we'd go down to West Virginia every spring and went to some of the famous West Virginia caves there. Sinnet was our first one. Spectacular cave. We went to many others in the area. In fact, eventually we went to Schoolhouse and Hellhole. It was after we had developed a bit of vertical technique and were able to get permission from the landowners. And so basically all the well-known West Virginia caves fell to our ability to go underground.
Then eventually you went to Indiana to go to school.
That's right. That's sort of an odd choice. I went to Williams College in Massachusetts, which was just over the hill, so to speak, in northwestern Massachusetts. And I decided to major in geology, which seemed appropriate for a cave enthusiast. And
Then later you turned to the dark side, became a hydrologist.
That's right, yeah. Well, I did a thesis on a cave in New York State. And I twisted arms and so forth, which was not very difficult to do because everybody wanted to do it. And so I had a whole group of people that wanted to go caving. There was a cave that opened up, to me anyway, by a set of unusual circumstances. It turns out that the cave was owned by somebody whom I had gone to high school with. and in New York State when we lived here for a short time. And so got the permission to go in as long as nobody else found out about it, except for the people that we went with. Well, you can't go in alone, so we had to invite other people along. And we always did it at night so nobody would see us go in. They didn't want it to be advertised or anything like that. And so we did, and it turned out to be a huge cave, a very difficult one too, with about a half mile of crawling right at the beginning with lots of cold water. And it opened up into pretty big passages. And we explored that for many years. Skull Cave. And there were others in the area, so we mapped that cave and the other caves as well.
Explain the equipment. No wetsuit.
Oh, the equipment. There was no equipment. What I'm wearing right now with a denim jacket was basically it. And you go in, bought a helmet, bought a light. The helmets were fairly expensive. They cost something like $3 at that time. And carbide lamps were $2.14. And so that got us into the caves and pretty safe because you got a helmet on. And aside from the fact that there were a couple of rope drops needed to get into them, into the cave, it was pretty foregone conclusion that we were going to spend a lot of time in there. And so we ended up with a cave that was something like 4 miles long and still going. And I did a thesis on that, and it involved hydrology and a little chemistry here and there. Had to dig into the literature and came up with names like Will White, and I read his articles and so forth, and he helped a whole lot just by being there. I didn't know him until much later, but it was a really big help in my undergraduate thesis. And one of my advisors said, "This is the best thesis I've ever seen." I knew he was just lying, but that's what he said. And I guess he didn't expect much of me. And so anyway, I graduated, and my advisor said, "Hey, there's a fellowship available at Indiana University in hydrology. Would you be interested in that?" So I applied for it, and I got it. And it paid basically for everything all the way through to the PhD. And it helped enormously in getting me off the ground. At the time, I thought it would be better if I did something other than in karst, because karst isn't something you can just do for the fun of it and expect to get paid. And my advisor at Indiana said, "You're an expert in this field already. Why don't you run with it?" And so being in a karst area in Indiana really worked out quite well. And the same time I decided on a thesis area, some of our friends discovered a cave that turned out to be quite large. It's over 20 miles long now. And so it was basically virgin all the way through. And so they and we, and including Peg, who was not married to me at the time, went in and mapped, explored and mapped, usually at the same time. And it was Bluespring Cave in Indiana. Until recently, it was the longest in Indiana. It's been outshined by a couple of other caves since then.
Well, Peg, your father was in the university as well. Did he know about you going caving, and what did he think about it?
Oh, we decided not to talk about it. It saved a lot of hassle. Yeah.
I don't think he was against the idea.
No,
it just
was always, they thought it was treacherous.
Yeah, well, treacherous and dirty and not dignified, crawling around in mud. How did I meet Peg? Well, Peg was not a caver. She was in my geomorphology class, and I was a teaching assistant, and so I needed to be on these field trips and go along on the field trip. So they had a field trip down south of the university and in a cave area. And so I naturally was a little late getting on the bus because my alarm clock didn't go off. So I came racing in at the very last minute before the bus took off. There was only one seat available close to me. That was one that Peg had left open. There were two girls in the class, and the one girl said, "This isn't working, we got to split up." And so I sat next to Peggy. Of course, she was thrilled to be sitting next to somebody she didn't know and who was late and hadn't shaved for about a couple of days. And we kind of hit it off. And there was an ice cream social being run later that day. And so we went to it and talked and got to know each other. I said, "Gee, you went to the Indiana University field camp in Montana." "So did I." It turns out we were there at the same year, but not the same time. And so I said, "I got a bunch of pictures I'd like to show you." I had taken a roll of film of 20 shots and took 20 pictures, and that was it. So I showed her the pictures, and she was thrilled, of course. And so it went on from there. I said, "Gee, you ought to see a cave sometime." And she wasn't really particularly excited about it, but with time.
The people.
Yes, that's it. Why don't you explain the people?
Well, why don't you explain the Chases? You met them.
There were people, many of the people who were interested in the caves were young. They were high school students. And so here I was in the graduate school, and I was obviously supposed to know more about caves than they did, but they were very good cavers, very good people.
They were good people.
Many of whom we still know. And in fact, one of them died just a couple of weeks ago, and there's going to be a little get-together in Indiana in his honor, and we'll all get together again. Just a very fine group of people.
You should have just said, like, you sat down beside her, and there was this handsome, devilish-looking man there, and she just fell head over heels for you right at that moment, and she probably wouldn't have denied it on camera. You like blew that story completely,
Yeah, right. Well, I'm trying to be truthful here. Actually, you sounded very interested and so forth. You were very polite. And I pointed out my thesis area as we drove by it, and she looks out, and here's this flat land, muggy insects and weeds and so forth. Just looked horrible. And she was going to be spending the summer in Montana, or Colorado, sorry, in the Rocky Mountains as a camp instructor. And so she didn't say at that time, but she felt sorry for me. So anyway, it worked out quite well. And we went to another cave, which turned out to be Bluespring Cave. And then I taught her how to use ropes and how to ascend using Prusik slings and how to descend with various other apparatus. And we got married. In fact, married before I left Indiana. You got a job with the Indiana's Geological Survey.
And Powell.
Dick Powell of the Indiana Survey was really great. He was older than I by not a whole lot, but he was kind of a comforter and a mentor.
Very open with all of everything he knew.
We learned a lot from him. And we got married, and a lot of our friends showed up. And we were just sitting around in Indiana, and an NSS convention was offered in Indiana. And so we helped to run it. And that was a good way to meet a lot of people from here and there. And we had a field trip to the tag country.
Oh.
Yeah, down to Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia. And the very first cave we went to was in a pit 250 feet deep. And Valhalla, yes. And Peg had rappelled a little bit. I showed her how to do it in a tree, and she'd been down a pit, but not back up again because somebody fell and hurt himself, and so we had to figure out a rescue with ropes pulling people out, and she got pulled out, as did I, to save time. But so she knew how to rappel, but not how to ascend. But she ascended just fine, as fast as anybody else, and she was good. So you helped a lot on my thesis mapping. Many of the times we would go into Bluespring Cave, just the two of us, and we would map in there.
You talked about your thesis having like 95% of it was Bluespring Cave. And what else did you talk about in your thesis besides Bluespring Cave?
Actually, it was more about the karst landscape itself, sinkholes, their development, rocks involved. The caves were a major part of it, of course, and Bluespring was just one of many caves in my thesis area.
You measured discharge.
A lot of discharge measurements, going down into a spring and measuring the flow coming out, going into Bluespring Cave and standing up to your waist in water and measuring with a flow meter, that sort of thing. So it was fairly innocent sort of work, but a lot of hard trips, and you stayed with it all the way through.
You hit a core bunch of wonderful people.
Yeah. So we were just lucky. I was just lucky. Peg was unlucky. She ended up with me.
It was fun.
Yeah.